Welcome back to the Jennie Podcast. Slow English, real conversations, better every day. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Jennie Podcast. I'm Jennie.
And I'm John. We're really happy you're here today. Maybe you're on the bus. Maybe you're drinking coffee. Or maybe you're studying English right now. And something keeps happening. You hear an English sentence. You understand a few words. Then your brain quietly asks, what does that mean in my language?
If that sounds familiar, this episode is for you. Today, we're talking about thinking in English, but not in the way you might expect.
We're not talking about learning thousands of new words. We're not talking about memorizing grammar rules. And we're definitely not talking about speaking like a native speaker overnight.
We're talking about something much smaller, but also much more important. Why does your brain keep translating, even after months or even years of learning English?
Can I ask everyone a question? Have you ever had this moment? Someone asks, how was your weekend? You understand the question. You know the answer. But nothing comes out. Not because you don't know English, because your brain is busy translating.
Don't worry. You're not alone. Almost every English learner has experienced this. And today, we don't want to teach you another study trick. We want to understand why this keeps happening. Because once you understand the real problem, everything starts to make much more sense.
Many people think, I translate because my English isn't good enough. Others say, I just need more vocabulary. Some people even believe, my memory is bad. Those answers sound reasonable. But are they really the root of the problem?
Let's think about it. You probably know hundreds, maybe even thousands of English words. You know words like happy, hungry, beautiful, morning, friend, water, phone. You know them. So why do they disappear when you're talking?
And here's another question. When you watch your favorite movie, sometimes you understand an English sentence immediately. No translating. No dictionary. You just understand it. So your brain already knows how to think directly. Sometimes. Why doesn't it happen all the time?
Maybe the problem isn't your English. Maybe the problem is something else. Maybe your brain has learned a habit, not an English habit, a translation habit. And habits are much harder to notice than mistakes.
Jennie, can I tell you something?
Of course.
Last week, I met a tourist. He smiled and asked, "Where is the train station?" It was a very simple question. I knew every word. But inside my head, something strange happened. First, I translated his question into Vietnamese. Then, I thought about my answer. Then, I translated my answer back into English. By the time I finished, he was already looking at Google Maps.
I think many people know that feeling. And here's the interesting part. The problem wasn't English. The problem was the extra step. Your brain took a long road when there was already a much shorter one.
A long road?
Imagine two roads. The first road is simple. English goes directly to understanding. The second road is much longer. English becomes your language. Then, your brain understands it. Then, your ideas become your language again. And finally, they become English. That's a lot of work for just one sentence.
No wonder conversations feel so fast. While I'm still translating, everyone else is already talking.
Exactly. And that's where the real problem begins. Not because you're bad at English, but because your brain believes translation is necessary. It feels safe. It feels familiar. So every single conversation, your brain chooses the longer road without even asking you.
And after a while, that long road becomes automatic.
Yes. And that's the beginning of a pattern. At first, you translate one sentence. Then, every sentence. Soon, every conversation feels slow. You start missing parts of the conversation. You become nervous because you're afraid someone will ask another question before you finished answering the first one. So you speak less, not because you have nothing to say, but because your brain is still working. Exactly. And when you speak less, you get less practice. With less practice, thinking directly in English becomes even harder. So the next conversation feels even slower. Then you start believing something that isn't true. Maybe I'm just bad at speaking English.
Even though the real problem started much earlier. With one habit, your brain repeated thousands of times.
That's the scary part. Most people think they're fighting an English problem, but they're actually fighting a thinking habit. And if that's the real pattern, how do we teach our brain to take the shorter road instead?
You know, there's something interesting about that. When people say, I want to think in English, they usually imagine a very big change. They imagine waking up one morning and suddenly their brain works in English. But that's almost never how it happens.
Exactly. Thinking in English isn't one big moment. It's thousands of tiny moments that slowly connect together. And every small connection makes the next one easier.
Can I tell you about something that happened to me?
Of course.
A few months ago, I tried something different. I stopped translating just for one object. Every morning, I picked up my coffee cup. Instead of thinking, coffee means, I simply looked at it and thought, coffee. Nothing else. Just coffee.
Only one word?
Yes, it felt almost too easy. But after a few days, something strange happened. I didn't have to remember the word anymore. When I saw the cup, my brain immediately thought, coffee. There was no translation. It just appeared. That's how direct connections begin. Not with long conversations, not with difficult grammar. Just one small connection repeated many times. It's like building a path through a forest. The first time, it's difficult. There are trees everywhere. You don't know where to walk. But if you walk the same path every day, the path becomes clearer. Eventually, you don't even think about it. You simply walk. Your brain works the same way. Every time you connect an English word directly to an object or a feeling or an action, you're making that path stronger. And that's why memorizing thousands of vocabulary words doesn't always help. Because knowing a word and using a word are completely different things. Think about this. Maybe you know the word hungry. You've seen it many times. You've answered questions about it. You even got it right on a test. But when your stomach starts making noise, what language appears first? If your answer is still your native language, then your brain hasn't built that direct road yet.
That's such an important difference. Learning English isn't only about collecting words. It's about changing which word appears first.
Exactly. Let's imagine two students. The first student studies vocabulary for 2 hours. They read long word lists, they translate every sentence. The second student studies for only 20 minutes. But every time they drink water, they think, I'm drinking water. Every time they open a door, they think, I'm opening the door. Every time they're tired, they quietly say, I'm tired. Who do you think is practicing real thinking in English?
Probably the second student, because they're connecting English to real life, not just to another language.
Exactly. Language lives inside experiences, not inside dictionaries.
And here's another mistake many learners make. They wait until their English is perfect. They think, when I know more grammar, then I'll start thinking in English. But that's backwards.
Very backwards. Because thinking in English isn't the reward for becoming good at English. It's one of the reasons you become better.
Imagine someone learning to swim. Would they say, I'll get into the water after I become a good swimmer? That doesn't make sense. You become a swimmer by getting into the water.
And you become someone who thinks in English by thinking a little in English. Today, not someday.
Even if it's only one word, one sentence, 1 minute, that's enough to begin.
Because remember, our brain doesn't care whether today's practice was perfect. It only notices what we repeat.
So if repeating translation builds a translation habit, what happens when we start repeating direct English instead?
That's where everything begins to change. Not overnight, but little by little. Your brain starts choosing English first. And one day, without even noticing, someone asks you a simple question. How are you? And for the first time, your answer arrives without translation. It simply comes naturally. So if that's the pattern, how do we actually teach our brain to build those direct English connections? Where do we even start? The answer is much smaller than most people think.
So, if that's the pattern, how do we break it? How do we stop translating and finally start thinking in English?
Maybe the answer isn't learning more English. Maybe it's changing the way we practice. Because remember, the real problem isn't vocabulary. The real problem is the habit of translating. So let's start there. Not with something big, with something very small.
Many English learners think, I need to study for 2 hours. But what happens? They feel tired. They skip one day, then another day. And suddenly, 1 week is gone.
Instead, try something much smaller. 5 minutes. That's all. 5 minutes where your only job is to think in English. Not speak perfectly, not study grammar, just think.
Let's imagine you're making coffee. You pick up your cup. Instead of thinking, Geico, think, cup. You pour water. Think, water. You sit down. Think, I'm drinking coffee. That's it. Nothing difficult, nothing perfect, just direct connections.
At first, your brain will still translate. That's okay. Don't fight it. Simply notice it. Then bring your attention back to English. Again and again. Every time you do that, your brain learns a new path.
It's like walking through a forest. The first time, there's no road. You have to push the branches away. It's slow, it's uncomfortable. But if you walk the same path every day, little by little, a road appears. Thinking in English works the same way.
Now let's move to something else. Your environment. Most people think learning happens only when they study. But your environment is teaching you all day. The question is, what is it teaching?
Imagine your bedroom. Everything around you speaks your native language. Your phone, your computer, your notebook, your calendar, even your shopping list. So every day, your brain practices thinking in your first language without realizing it. What if we change just a few things? Change your phone language. Write small sticky notes. Door, mirror, window, laptop, bottle. Every time you see them, your brain reads English first. Not because you're studying, because English has quietly become part of your life. That's the secret. Don't only create study time. Create an English environment. A small one, a simple one, but one that reminds your brain again and again. There's another system that works surprisingly well. Talk to yourself. Yes, it sounds a little funny, but it works.
Imagine you're cooking dinner. You don't need a conversation partner. You simply say, I'm cutting vegetables. The rice is ready. I'm hungry. This smells good. Nobody is judging you. Nobody is correcting you. You're simply giving your brain more chances to think directly in English.
And here's something interesting. Children do this naturally. When they learn their first language, they don't memorize vocabulary lists. They connect words to real life again and again. Maybe we should learn English the same way.
But there's one more thing, and I think many learners forget this. Learning English doesn't have to be lonely.
That's true. Sometimes one conversation changes everything. Not because it's perfect, because it's real.
Maybe you have one friend learning English. Instead of sending good morning, send good morning. How are you today? Maybe you write one English comment on YouTube. Maybe you answer one simple question in English. Little by little, English becomes communication, not homework.
And once English becomes communication, something beautiful happens. Your brain stops asking, how do I translate this? It starts asking, how can I say this? Can you hear the difference? One question looks backward. The other looks forward. That's when real progress begins.
So, we've talked about your actions. We've talked about your environment. We've talked about the people around you. But there's still one final piece. And honestly, it might be the most important one. Because even if your vocabulary grows, even if your grammar gets better, one belief can still hold you back. The story you keep telling yourself. Let's talk about the last piece. And maybe the most important one. It's not your vocabulary. It's not your grammar. It's not your pronunciation. It's the story you tell yourself.
Many English learners say, my English is terrible. I can't think in English. I'm too slow. I'll never sound natural. Have you ever said something like that? The problem is, your brain listens. Every time you repeat those words, they become part of your identity. Little by little, you stop saying, I'm learning English. And you start saying, I'm just bad at English. Those two sentences are completely different. The first sentence has hope. The second sentence feels like a final answer. Imagine two students. Both make the same mistake. Both forget the same word. Both stop speaking for a few seconds. The first student smiles and says, I'm still learning. The second student says, see? I'm terrible. Who do you think will keep improving? Probably the first one. Not because they're smarter, because they give themselves another chance. Exactly. Learning English isn't about never making mistakes. It's about not letting mistakes decide who you are. One translation doesn't mean you'll always translate. One difficult conversation doesn't mean you'll never speak fluently. One bad day doesn't decide your future. Maybe instead of saying, I can't think in English, try saying, I'm learning to think in English.
Can you hear the difference? One sentence closes the door. The other keeps it open. Every language learner starts somewhere. Every fluent speaker once searched for simple words. Every confident conversation began with one small sentence. Nobody skipped the beginning, so don't compare. Your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20. Your only job is to become a little better than yesterday. And remember, thinking in English doesn't happen overnight. It happens one word, one sentence, one conversation at a time. Before we finish today's conversation, let's review a few useful words. These are not random words. You already heard them many times today. That's why they're easier to remember.
Our first word is translate. To translate means to change words from one language into another. For example, I still translate every sentence in my head.
Next is direct connection. A direct connection means your brain understands English without using your first language. For example, I'm trying to build a direct connection with English.
The third word is habit.
A habit is something you do again and again. Today we learned that translating is also a habit. For example, thinking in English is becoming my new habit.
Next, environment. Your environment is everything around you. Sometimes changing your environment can change your habits. For example, I changed my phone to English.
Another useful word is label. To label means to give something a name. Today, we talked about labeling the world around us in English. For example, I labeled everything in my room.
And our final word? Patient. Patient means calm while something takes time. Learning English takes patience. For example, I'm trying to be patient with myself.
Now, let's remember one sentence from today's episode. Don't translate, connect. Let's say it together. Don't translate, connect. One more time. Don't translate, connect. Simple, but powerful.
Before we say goodbye, I want to ask you one question. Right now, look around your room. What's the first thing you see? Don't translate it. Think of the English word first. Just one word. That's enough. Because every fluent speaker once started with one word. And here's today's quote. Fluent English doesn't begin when you know more words. It begins when you stop translating every thought. Let's say that again. Fluent English doesn't begin when you know more words. It begins when you stop translating every thought. Thank you for staying with us until the end. You didn't have to, but you did. And we truly appreciate that. If today's conversation helped you, share it with someone who still feels trapped inside their own translation. Maybe this episode will help them take their very first step toward thinking in English. Take care of yourself. Be patient. Keep practicing. One small step every day. We'll see you in the next episode. Bye, everyone.